The rhythmic thrum of rotor blades cutting through mountain air had become Evelyn Thomas's lullaby over the past 18 months. Her Apache helicopter, callsign Phoenix 7, hung suspended 3,000 feet above the Afghan valley like a metallic predator caught in an impossible moment of rest. The October sun painted the cockpit in amber hues, and for the first time in 72 hours, Captain Evelyn Thomas had allowed herself the luxury of closed eyes, creating these detailed stories takes considerable time and effort. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Her flight helmet rested against the reinforced glass, dark auburn hair escaping in wisps around the edges. The communications headset crackled softly, with distant chatter from base operations, but nothing urgent enough to pierce through her exhaustion. Below her, the Helmand province stretched endlessly, a tapestry of brown earth, scattered settlements, and the silver thread of an ancient river that had witnessed countless conflicts across millennia. Evelyn's hands remained instinctively positioned on the controls, muscle memory keeping her ready even in sleep. The collective lever rested under her left palm, while her right hand curved naturally around the cyclic stick. 28 years old, she had already logged over 800 combat hours, more than pilots twice her age. Her squadron mates called her Iron Eyes for her ability to spot threats that others missed. But today those sharp hazel eyes were finally at rest. The Apache's engines hummed their mechanical song, a sound that had become more familiar to her than her own heartbeat. She wore her father's St. Christopher medallion beneath her flight suit, a small rebellion against military regulations, but one that connected her to home in North Dakota, where endless wheat fields had first taught her to dream of flying. Above the world's problems, Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, her weapons systems officer seated behind her, monitored the radio channels with practiced efficiency. His weathered hands moved across the weapons controls console with the precision of a concert pianist. Eyes scanning the targeting displays that showed their assigned patrol sector remained quiet. At 34, Rodriguez had flown with 4 different pilots during his deployment, but none had earned his respect like Captain Thomas. She possessed an intuitive understanding of the Apache's capabilities that reminded him of the old-school aviators who had taught him to fight from the sky. Phoenix 7 to desert control. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his headset, not wanting to wake his pilot. Sector 7 Alpha remains clear. No movement detected in assigned patrol area. The response crackled back through the comm system. Copy Phoenix 7. Maintain station. Intel suggests possible Taliban movement in adjacent valleys, but your sector shows negative contact. Evelyn stirred slightly, her unconscious mind processing the radio traffic even in sleep. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the controls, a fighter pilot's instinct that never fully rested. In her dreams, she was 7 years old again, watching her grandfather's crop duster dance across summer skies, promising herself that someday she would command the heavens with equal grace. The valley below held secrets in every shadow. Ancient trade routes carved by centuries of caravans intersected with modern smuggling paths used by insurgents moving weapons and personnel. The small village of Kala-e-Shur nestled against the eastern slope, its mud brick compounds and narrow lanes hiding families who had endured decades of conflict. From 3,000 feet, it looked peaceful, almost pastoral, but Evelyn had learned that in Afghanistan, appearance and reality rarely coincided. Her Apache carried enough firepower to level the entire village, yet she had spent months learning to use that power with surgical precision. The Hellfire missiles mounted on her external pylons were instruments of devastation, but in her hands, they became tools of protection for the innocent. She had once fired a single missile through a window no larger than a car door to eliminate a sniper who had been terrorizing a school, saving dozens of children while leaving their classroom intact. The weight of such responsibility had carved lines around her eyes that made her appear older than her years. Command had noticed her exceptional performance, and rumors circulated about a possible promotion to major and transfer to an instructor position stateside. But Evelyn wasn't ready to leave the fight, not when her squadron still needed her expertise and her troops still looked to her for leadership that could mean the difference between coming home or coming home in a flag-draped box, a thermal updraft. From the valley floor caused the Apache to shift slightly, and Evelyn's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She saw Rodriguez checking their fuel status and weapon systems, noted the peaceful appearance of the landscape below, then allowed herself to drift back toward sleep. They had been airborne for 4 hours on what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance patrol, and fatigue was beginning to cloud her judgment, a dangerous state for a combat pilot. The medallion around her neck caught, a beam of sunlight filtering through the cockpit canopy. Her father had worn it through 3 tours in Vietnam, and her grandfather had carried it during World War II bombing runs over Germany. 3 generations of aviators, each fighting different wars, but bound by the same commitment to protect others. From the sky, the weight of that legacy pressed down on her shoulders like invisible armor, both protecting and burdening her with expectations that sometimes felt impossible to fulfill. Rodriguez noticed something on his thermal imaging display, a brief heat signature that appeared and vanished too quickly to classify. He enhanced the image resolution and switched to different sensor modes, but whatever he had detected was gone. In this part of Afghanistan, such fleeting contacts usually meant nothing more than wildlife or civilians moving between villages. Still, his training demanded vigilance, and he made a mental note to monitor that sector more closely. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and professional. They had flown together long enough to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's actions in combat situations where seconds could determine survival. Evelyn trusted Rodriguez with her life every time they lifted off, and he had never given her reason to doubt that trust. Their Apache was more than a machine. It was an extension of their combined will, a fusion of human skill and technological superiority that made them formidable opponents for anyone foolish enough to challenge American air power. But even the most advanced weapon systems had limitations, and even the most skilled pilots could be caught off guard. The mountains of Afghanistan had witnessed the destruction of supposedly invincible forces throughout history, from British expeditions to Soviet helicopters. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against outsiders, offering countless hiding places and escape routes to those who knew how to use them. As Evelyn dozed, her subconscious mind processed the subtle changes in engine vibration, wind patterns, and radio chatter that indicated the operational environment around them. Years of combat flying had developed her situational awareness to almost supernatural levels, but exhaustion was beginning to dull those finely honed senses. She knew she should request permission to return to base, but their mission briefing had emphasized the importance of maintaining air cover in this sector throughout the afternoon. The medallion grew warm against her skin, heated by the autumn sun streaming through the cockpit. In her half-conscious state, she could almost hear her father's voice recounting stories of close calls and impossible missions, of fellow pilots who never made it home and others who became legends. He had taught her that flying was both art and science, requiring technical precision balanced with intuitive understanding of forces that could never be fully controlled. Rodriguez keyed his microphone again, this time with slightly more urgency in his voice. Desert Control, Phoenix 7. Request confirmation of friendly aircraft in our patrol sector. I'm picking up intermittent contacts on thermal. The response took longer than usual. Phoenix 7, stand by for traffic information. Something in the controller's tone caused Rodriguez to sit straighter in his seat. He began systematically scanning all sensor modes, looking for whatever had triggered his growing unease. The Apache's sophisticated electronic warfare suite showed no hostile radar emissions, no incoming missiles, no electronic jamming attempts. Yet his instincts, honed by dozens of combat missions, insisted that something was wrong. The valley below remained deceptively peaceful, but Rodriguez knew that in Afghanistan, threats could materialize from nowhere with lethal speed. He considered waking Captain Thomas, but decided to gather more information first. She needed the rest, and his instruments showed nothing definitive enough to justify interrupting her sleep. Unknown to both aviators, 4 enemy helicopters had been tracking them for the past 20 minutes, using terrain masking and advanced stealth technology to remain undetected. The trap was closing around Phoenix 7 with mechanical precision, each enemy aircraft positioning itself for maximum tactical advantage. In less than 60 seconds, Captain Evelyn Thomas would wake up to find herself in the fight of her life, surrounded by hostiles in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The rhythmic thrum of rotor blades cutting through mountain air had become Evelyn Thomas's lullaby over the past 18 months. Her Apache helicopter, callsign Phoenix 7, hung suspended 3,000 feet above the Afghan valley like a metallic predator caught in an impossible moment of rest. The October sun painted the cockpit in amber hues, and for the first time in 72 hours, Captain Evelyn Thomas had allowed herself the luxury of closed eyes. Creating these detailed stories takes considerable time and effort. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Her flight helmet rested against the reinforced glass, dark auburn hair escaping in wisps around the edges. The communications headset crackled softly, with distant chatter from base operations, but nothing urgent enough to pierce through her exhaustion. Below her, the Helmand province stretched endlessly, a tapestry of brown earth, scattered settlements, and the silver thread of an ancient river that had witnessed countless conflicts across millennia. Evelyn's hands remained instinctively positioned on the controls, muscle memory keeping her ready even in sleep. The collective lever rested under her left palm, while her right hand curved naturally around the cyclic stick. 28 years old, she had already logged over 800 combat hours, more than pilots twice her age. Her squadron mates called her Iron Eyes for her ability to spot threats that others missed. But today those sharp hazel eyes were finally at rest. The Apache's engines hummed their mechanical song, a sound that had become more familiar to her than her own heartbeat. She wore her father's St. Christopher medallion beneath her flight suit, a small rebellion against military regulations, but one that connected her to home in North Dakota, where endless wheat fields had first taught her to dream of flying. Above the world's problems, Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, her weapons systems officer seated behind her, monitored the radio channels with practiced efficiency. His weathered hands moved across the weapons controls console with the precision of a concert pianist. Eyes scanning the targeting displays that showed their assigned patrol sector remained quiet. At 34, Rodriguez had flown with 4 different pilots during his deployment, but none had earned his respect like Captain Thomas. She possessed an intuitive understanding of the Apache's capabilities that reminded him of the old-school aviators who had taught him to fight from the sky. Phoenix 7 to desert control. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his headset, not wanting to wake his pilot. Sector 7 Alpha remains clear. No movement detected in assigned patrol area. The response crackled back through the COM system. Copy, Phoenix 7. Maintain station. Intel suggests possible Taliban movement in adjacent valleys, but your sector shows negative contact. Evelyn stirred slightly, her unconscious mind processing the radio traffic even in sleep. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly on the controls, a fighter pilot's instinct that never fully rested. In her dreams, she was 7 years old again, watching her grandfather's crop duster dance across summer skies, promising herself that someday she would command the heavens with equal grace. The valley below held secrets in every shadow. Ancient trade routes carved by centuries of caravans intersected with modern smuggling paths used by insurgents moving weapons and personnel. The small village of Kala-Ishur nestled against the eastern slope, its mud brick compounds and narrow lanes hiding families who had endured decades of conflict. From 3,000 feet, it looked peaceful, almost pastoral. But Evelyn had learned that in Afghanistan, appearance and reality rarely coincided. Her Apache carried enough firepower to level the entire village. Yet she had spent months learning to use that power with surgical precision. The Hellfire missiles mounted on her external pylons were instruments of devastation, but in her hands they became tools of protection for the innocent. She had once fired a single missile through a window no larger than a car door to eliminate a sniper who had been terrorizing a school, saving dozens of children while leaving their classroom intact. The weight of such responsibility had carved lines around her eyes that made her appear older than her years. Command had noticed her exceptional performance, and rumors circulated about a possible promotion to major and transfer to an instructor position stateside. But Evelyn wasn't ready to leave the fight. Not when her squadron still needed her expertise and her troops still looked to her for leadership that could mean the difference between coming home or coming home in a flag-draped box. A thermal updraft from the valley floor caused the Apache to shift slightly, and Evelyn's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She saw Rodriguez checking their fuel status and weapon systems, noted the peaceful appearance of the landscape below, then allowed herself to drift back toward sleep. They had been airborne for 4 hours on what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance patrol, and fatigue was beginning to cloud her judgment, a dangerous state for a combat pilot. The medallion around her neck caught a beam of sunlight filtering through the cockpit canopy. Her father had worn it through 3 tours in Vietnam, and her grandfather had carried it during World War II bombing runs over Germany. 3 generations of aviators, each fighting different wars, but bound by the same commitment to protect others. From the sky, the weight of that legacy pressed down on her shoulders like invisible armor, both protecting and burdening her with expectations that sometimes felt impossible to fulfill. Rodriguez noticed something on his thermal imaging display, a brief heat signature that appeared and vanished too quickly to classify. He enhanced the image resolution and switched to different sensor modes, but whatever he had detected was gone. In this part of Afghanistan, such fleeting contacts usually meant nothing more than wildlife or civilians moving between villages. Still, his training demanded vigilance, and he made a mental note to monitor that sector more closely. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and professional. They had flown together long enough to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's actions in combat situations where seconds could determine survival. Evelyn trusted Rodriguez with her life every time they lifted off, and he had never given her reason to doubt that trust. Their Apache was more than a machine. It was an extension of their combined will, a fusion of human skill and technological superiority that made them formidable opponents for anyone foolish enough to challenge American air power. But even the most advanced weapon systems had limitations, and even the most skilled pilots could be caught off guard. The mountains of Afghanistan had witnessed the destruction of supposedly invincible forces throughout history, from British expeditions to Soviet helicopters. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against outsiders, offering countless hiding places and escape routes to those who knew how to use them. As Evelyn dozed, her subconscious mind processed the subtle changes in engine vibration, wind patterns, and radio chatter that indicated the operational environment around them. Years of combat flying had developed her situational awareness to almost supernatural levels, but exhaustion was beginning to dull those finely honed senses. She knew she should request permission to return to base, but their mission briefing had emphasized the importance of maintaining air cover in this sector throughout the afternoon. The medallion grew warm against her skin, heated by the autumn sun streaming through the cockpit. In her half-conscious state, she could almost hear her father's voice recounting stories of close calls and impossible missions, of fellow pilots who never made it home and others who became legends. He had taught her that flying was both art and science, requiring technical precision balanced with intuitive understanding of forces that could never be fully controlled. Rodriguez keyed his microphone again, this time with slightly more urgency in his voice. Desert Control, Phoenix 7. Request confirmation of friendly aircraft in our patrol sector. I'm picking up intermittent contacts on thermal. The response took longer than usual. Phoenix 7, stand by for traffic information. Something in the controller's tone caused Rodriguez to sit straighter in his seat. He began systematically scanning all sensor modes, looking for whatever had triggered his growing unease. The Apache's sophisticated electronic warfare suite showed no hostile radar emissions, no incoming missiles, no electronic jamming attempts. Yet his instincts, honed by dozens of combat missions, insisted that something was wrong. The valley below remained deceptively peaceful, but Rodriguez knew that in Afghanistan, threats could materialize from nowhere with lethal speed. He considered waking Captain Thomas, but decided to gather more information first. She needed the rest, and his instruments showed nothing definitive enough to justify interrupting her sleep. Unknown to both aviators, 4 enemy helicopters had been tracking them for the past 20 minutes, using terrain masking and advanced stealth technology to remain undetected. The trap was closing around Phoenix 7 with mechanical precision, each enemy aircraft positioning itself for maximum tactical advantage. In less than 60 seconds, Captain Evelyn Thomas would wake up to find herself in the fight of her life, surrounded by hostiles in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Edge of survival. Other veterans had warned her about this possibility, describing their own struggles to readjust to civilian life after experiencing the unique camaraderie and purpose that military service provided. The weight of command had settled on her shoulders gradually, each successful mission adding to her reputation and increasing others' expectations of her performance. Younger pilots sought her advice, ground troops requested her specific aircraft for dangerous missions, and senior officers spoke of her as a candidate for accelerated promotion. But recognition brought pressure that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. She had developed small rituals and mental exercises to manage stress and maintain psychological balance. Before each mission, she spent 10 minutes in quiet meditation, clearing her mind of distractions and focusing on the tasks ahead. After returning from combat sorties, she wrote detailed notes in a personal journal, recording not just tactical information, but also her emotional responses and moral concerns about her actions. The journal had become a repository for thoughts too dangerous to share with anyone else. Doubts about American strategy, anger at politicians who sent soldiers to fight wars they didn't understand, grief for enemy combatants who might have been good men corrupted by bad circumstances. Writing helped her process experiences that threatened to fragment her sense of identity and purpose. Her relationship with her crew chief, Sergeant First Class Angela Martinez, provided another anchor point in the chaos of deployment. Martinez maintained their Apache with religious devotion, inspecting every component with the thoroughness of someone who understood that mechanical failure could mean death for the aircrew. The two women had developed a professional rapport built on mutual respect and shared understanding of the unique challenges facing female soldiers in combat roles. "This bird will bring you home every time," Martinez often told Evelyn before missions. "Just don't ask her to do anything stupid." That advice had become prophetic on several occasions when Evelyn's tactical instincts conflicted with aggressive mission orders from higher headquarters. She had learned to trust the Apache's capabilities while respecting its limitations, pushing the aircraft to its performance envelope without crossing the line into recklessness that could prove fatal. The loneliness of command was perhaps the most difficult aspect of her deployment to endure. As an officer, she couldn't socialize freely with enlisted personnel, and as one of the few women in the unit, she often felt isolated from her male peers. Military regulations and social expectations created invisible barriers that prevented the kind of deep friendships that might have made deployment more bearable. But solitude had also taught her to rely on her own judgment and inner strength in ways that might not have developed in a more supportive environment. She had discovered reserves of courage and determination that surprised even her, abilities that emerged only when tested by extreme circumstances. Combat had revealed both her limitations and her potential, showing her aspects of herself that she never would have encountered in civilian life. As she prepared for what would become the most challenging mission of her deployment, Evelyn carried with her all these internal contradictions and unresolved tensions. She was simultaneously confident and uncertain, experienced and still learning, strong and vulnerable. The complexity of her character would soon be tested by circumstances that would demand every skill she had developed and every ounce of courage she possessed. A subtle change in the quality of radio static, a brief electromagnetic pulse that caused his targeting display to flicker, the almost subliminal vibration of rotor blades that didn't belong to friendly aircraft. These microsignals coalesced into a sudden, overwhelming certainty that they were no longer alone in the sky. "Captain." Rodriguez's voice cut through Evelyn's drowsy consciousness like a blade. "We've got company." Evelyn's eyes snapped open, her body instantly flooding with adrenaline as months of combat training overrode her exhaustion. Her hands moved to the controls with automatic precision while her mind rapidly processed the tactical situation unfolding around them. The peaceful afternoon had transformed into something deadly, and she could feel the weight of unseen threats pressing against her consciousness like a physical force. "Talk to me, Rodriguez. What do you see?" "4 contacts, ma'am. 2 at our 6 o'clock, 1 each at 3 and 9. They're masked in the terrain shadows, but I'm getting intermittent thermal signatures. These aren't friendlies." The Apache's radar warning receiver suddenly came alive with urgent electronic chirping, indicating that enemy fire control systems had locked onto their aircraft. Red warning lights began flashing across the instrument panel as the helicopters' defensive systems detected multiple threats converging on their position. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten as the reality of their situation became clear. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and caught at a severe tactical disadvantage. "Desert control, Phoenix 7. She barked into her radio. "We are in contact with 4 hostile aircraft. Coordinates 7-7-9er-4-5-6. Request immediate backup and vector to nearest friendly forces." The response was fragmented by what sounded like jamming. "Phoenix ... 7 ... cannot ... backup ... unengaging ... unengaging ... cannot ... backup ... gap. TARGETS. The enemy had apparently coordinated their attack to coincide with jamming of military communications frequencies, isolating the Apache from potential support. Evelyn realized with growing alarm that they were truly alone, facing odds that would challenge even the most experienced combat pilot. The enemies had chosen their moment perfectly, catching her in a state of reduced readiness while denying her access to the resources that might have evened the fight. "Rodriguez, I need weapon status and targeting solutions on all contacts. And get me everything you can about these aircraft type, capabilities, probable intentions." "Working on it, ma'am." Switching to combat mode. The Apache systems transformed from passive reconnaissance configuration to full combat readiness within seconds. Weapons came online, targeting computers began calculating firing solutions, and the helicopter's defensive countermeasures prepared to deploy chaff and flares against incoming missiles. The machine's electronic brain processed thousands of variables simultaneously, but the human brains inside the cockpit would ultimately determine whether they survived the next few minutes. Through her helmet-mounted display, Evelyn could see the first enemy helicopter emerging from behind a mountain ridge to the east. It was a Russian-built Mi-24 Hind, heavily armed and flown by someone who clearly understood its capabilities. The aircraft moved with the confident aggression of a predator that had cornered its prey, closing distance while maintaining enough altitude to bring its weapons to bear on the Apache's vulnerable underside. "Contact bearing 090, range 2,000 meters, Rodriguez called out. "Hind gunship, armed with rockets and cannon. He's maneuvering for an attack run." A second enemy aircraft appeared from the south, this one a more modern Mi-28. Night Hunter equipped with advanced sensors and anti-tank missiles. Its sleek profile and purposeful movement indicated a crew with significant combat experience, possibly Russian special forces or highly trained mercenaries, the systematic way. Both helicopters were positioning themselves, suggested careful planning rather than opportunistic engagement. "Ma'am, we've got a serious problem," Rodriguez continued, his voice tight with controlled anxiety. "These aren't Taliban insurgents with stolen aircraft. This is professional military aviation, coordinated and equipped with top-tier hardware. Someone has set a very sophisticated trap." Evelyn's mind raced through tactical options while her hands made minute adjustments to their aircraft's position and attitude. The Apache was a formidable weapons platform, but it was designed primarily for engaging ground targets, not aerial combat with other helicopters. Their advantages lay in advanced sensors, precision weapons, and superior training, but they were outnumbered 2-1 and caught in an unfavorable tactical position. "We're going to have to fight our way out," she announced, her voice carrying the cold determination that had earned her reputation among fellow pilots. "Rodriguez, designate the Hind as primary target. I'm going to try to break their formation and force them into individual engagements where our superior technology might give us an edge." "Copy that." "Target designated, weapons hot." The third and fourth enemy aircraft revealed themselves simultaneously, emerging from concealed positions north and west of the Apache's location. The coordinated timing of their appearance confirmed Evelyn's worst fears. This was a carefully planned ambush, not a chance encounter. Someone had studied American helicopter tactics, identified the Apache's vulnerabilities, and constructed a scenario designed to exploit those weaknesses. The northern aircraft was another Mi-24 Hind, but this one showed modifications that suggested special operations use. Hardpoints mounted additional rocket pods, and what appeared to be electronic warfare equipment protruded from the fuselage. The western contact was a Mi-8 HIP transport helicopter that had been converted for attack roles, bristling with machine guns and rocket launchers that could devastate the Apache if brought to bear at close range. 4 confirmed hostiles, Rodriguez reported grimly. "We're completely surrounded, and they're all armed for bear." "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like this coordination outside of major military exercises." Evelyn's training at the Army Aviation Warfighting Center had included scenarios involving aerial combat with enemy helicopters, but those exercises had assumed 1-on-1 or 2-on-1 engagements with inferior aircraft flown by less skilled opponents. This situation violated all those assumptions, presenting challenges that pushed beyond the envelope of standard tactical doctrine. "They're trying to force us down into the valley where we'll be trapped by terrain," she observed, noting how the enemy formation was subtly herding them toward lower altitude where their maneuverability would be restricted. "We need to gain altitude and create separation between us and the ground, even if it means exposing ourselves to more threats." The first missile launch came from the Mi-28 to the south, a wire-guided anti-tank rocket that streaked toward them with deadly accuracy. Evelyn threw the Apache into a violent evasive maneuver, diving toward the deck while deploying chaff and flares to confuse the incoming weapons guidance system. The missile passed close enough that they could hear its warhead detonate against the mountain slope behind them. That was too close. Rodriguez shouted over the sound of alarms and defensive systems. "They've got our range and they know how to use their weapons." "Then we'd better make sure our first shots count," Evelyn replied, bringing the Apache around in a tight climbing turn that positioned them for a counterattack against the Mi-28. "Target the Night Hunter. He's got the most sophisticated weapons suite. If we can eliminate him first, we might have a chance against the others." The engagement that followed would be remembered by military analysts as one of the most complex helicopter versus helicopter battles in modern warfare. 4 enemy aircraft working in coordinated pairs attempted to overwhelm a single Apache through superior numbers and tactical positioning, while Evelyn and Rodriguez fought back with everything their training and their machine could provide. Apache's 30mm chain gun spun up with a distinctive whining sound as Evelyn brought the aircraft's nose to bear on the approaching Mi-28. The target was maneuvering aggressively, using terrain masking and evasive flight patterns that made accurate gunnery difficult. At ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, even the Apache's advanced fire control system struggled to maintain target lock on a rapidly moving helicopter. "He's jamming our targeting radar," Rodriguez reported. "I'm switching to thermal tracking. But he's deploying countermeasures that are degrading target resolution." A second missile launch, this one from the western Mi-8, forced Evelyn to abandon her attack run and dive behind a ridgeline for protection. The rocket impacted the mountainside, an explosion of rock and flame, close enough to buffet their aircraft with the shock wave. Fragments of shrapnel struck the Apache's armored fuselage with metallic pings that reminded both crew members how thin the line was between survival and destruction. "They're coordinating their attacks to prevent us from engaging any single target," Evelyn realized. "Every time we line up a shot, another aircraft forces us defensive. We need to change the tactical dynamics or they're going to wear us down." The enemy formation was executing a classic multiple threat engagement, using superior numbers to maintain constant pressure while preventing their target from concentrating firepower on any individual aircraft. It was sophisticated aerial warfare that required extensive training and coordination, confirming that they were facing professional military operators rather than irregular forces. Rodriguez managed to achieve a brief target lock on the northern hind and fired a Hellfire missile in a high-arcing trajectory designed to attack from above where the enemy's armor protection was thinnest. The missile's guidance system tracked the target through the initial phase of flight, but countermeasures and evasive maneuvering caused it to miss by mere meters, detonating harmlessly against empty ground. "Damn!" he evaded at the last second. Rodriguez cursed. "These guys know exactly what they're doing." The psychological pressure of being outnumbered and surrounded was beginning to affect both crew members, despite their extensive combat experience. The constant threat of incoming missiles, the need for continuous evasive maneuvering, and the growing realization that they might not survive this engagement created stress levels that threatened to overwhelm their decision-making abilities. "Stay focused," Evelyn commanded, as much to herself as to Rodriguez. "We've trained for this. Our aircraft is better, our weapons are more accurate, and we know these mountains. We just need to be smarter than they are." But even as she spoke those words, she could feel the tactical situation deteriorating. Fuel was becoming a concern. Violent maneuvering consumed much more aviation gasoline than normal flight operations. Ammunition was limited, and every missed shot reduced their chances of survival. Most critically, the enemy seemed to have unlimited patience, content to maintain pressure while gradually wearing down the Apache's defenses. The fourth enemy aircraft, the converted Mi-8, had been hanging back from the main engagement, but now it began moving aggressively toward their position. Its role became clear as door gunners opened fire with heavy machine guns, filling the air with streams of tracer rounds that forced Evelyn into another series of desperate evasive maneuvers. "They're trying to drive us into a crossfire," she realized. "The Mi-8 is acting as a beater, pushing us toward the others where they can concentrate their firepower." The tactical situation was rapidly approaching a crisis point, where survival would depend more on luck than skill. Evelyn's years of training, her natural flying ability, and the Apache's technological advantages were being systematically neutralized by superior numbers and coordinated tactics. Unless something changed dramatically, Phoenix 7 was going to become another statistic in the long history of air combat over Afghanistan. But Captain Evelyn Thomas had not survived 800 hours of combat flying by accepting impossible situations as inevitable defeats. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a plan was beginning to form, desperate, dangerous, and requiring split-second timing, but offering the only realistic chance of turning the tables on their attackers. The next few minutes would determine whether she was the tactical genius her reputation suggested, or just another overconfident pilot who had finally encountered a situation beyond her abilities. In the crucible of aerial combat, time becomes elastic, stretching moments of decision into eternities while compressing complex tactical sequences into heartbeats. Evelyn's mind operated in this accelerated state as she processed the impossible mathematics of their survival. 4 enemy helicopters, professional crews, coordinated attacks, diminishing ammunition, rising fuel consumption. No backup. The variables formed equations with only negative solutions, until she remembered something from her advanced tactical training that might change everything. "Rodriguez, I need you to paint that ridgeline at bearing 270 with the laser designator, maximum power, sustained illumination." "Ma'am, there's nothing there but rocks and, trust me, light it up like a Christmas tree and keep it lit no matter what happens." The Apache's laser designator swiveled toward the seemingly empty ridge and began pulsing invisible infrared energy at maximum intensity. To the naked eye, nothing changed, but to anyone monitoring military frequencies or using night vision equipment, the mountainside suddenly blazed like a beacon. Evelyn was gambling everything on a single assumption about the tactical situation, that they weren't alone in these mountains, and that other eyes were watching this engagement unfold. The first confirmation came through her radio as the jamming suddenly cleared. "Phoenix 7, this is Reaper 6-1. We have visual on your engagement and are tracking multiple hostile aircraft in your vicinity." Evelyn's heart leaped as she recognized the call sign of a Predator drone that had apparently been conducting reconnaissance in the area. The unmanned aircraft couldn't directly engage the enemy helicopters, but it could provide something almost as valuable: real-time intelligence and coordination with other assets that might be within range. "Reaper 6-1, Phoenix 7. I need immediate tasking of any available close air support. We are outnumbered 4-1 and running low on ammunition." "Phoenix 7, be advised that Ghost Rider 3-4 is approximately 10 minutes out. With a full weapons load, can you maintain current position?" 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours in their current tactical situation, but the knowledge that help was coming provided psychological reinforcement that translated into renewed tactical confidence. Evelyn began calculating how to stretch their ammunition and fuel while keeping the enemy engaged long enough for the IC-130 gunship to arrive and change the balance of power. "Rodriguez, new plan. We're going to use their coordination against them. These guys are flying information patterns that make them predictable. I need you to anticipate their movements and pre-position our weapons for ambush shots." "Copy that. I'm seeing a pattern in how they rotate attack runs. The Mi-28 likes to attack from high altitude while the Hinds provide low-level suppression. If we can disrupt that sequence..." A burst of cannon fire from the eastern Hind forced them into another violent evasive maneuver, but this time Evelyn used the movement to position their aircraft for a counterattack. Instead of simply evading, she executed a climbing spiral that brought them above and behind the attacking helicopter just as it completed its firing pass. "Target," Rodriguez shouted. "Range 800 meters, target lock established." The Apache's 30mm chain gun spoke with mechanical fury, sending a stream of depleted uranium rounds toward the Heinz vulnerable engine compartment. At this range, with a steady firing platform and clear line of sight, the advanced fire control system proved its worth. Explosive impacts walked across the enemy helicopter's fuselage, and black smoke began streaming from its port engine. The damaged Hind immediately began descending toward the valley floor, its pilot fighting to maintain control while his aircraft lost power and altitude. One threat eliminated, 3 remaining better odds, but still desperate. "Good kill," Rodriguez called out. "That Hind is going down." But their tactical victory was short-lived. The remaining 3 enemy aircraft responded to the loss of their teammate by intensifying their attacks, launching multiple missiles simultaneously from different directions. Evelyn found herself flying the Apache through a 3-dimensional maze of incoming weapons, while trying to maintain enough offensive capability to continue the fight. "Multiple missile launches," Rodriguez warned. 2 from the south, 1 from the west. Impact in 15 seconds. The Apache's defensive systems automatically deployed chaff and flares while Evelyn threw the helicopter into a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and crew to their physical limits. G-forces compressed her into her seat as she dove toward the deck, then pulled up sharply to avoid the mountainous terrain that rose like a stone wall in front of them. The first missile detonated, close enough to pepper their aircraft with shrapnel, spider-webbing the cockpit canopy and triggering multiple warning alarms. The second weapon missed entirely, confused by their defensive countermeasures, but the third struck a glancing blow against their port-side weapon pylon, severing hydraulic lines and causing a cascade of system failures. "We're hit," Rodriguez reported, losing hydraulic pressure on the primary flight control system. "Switching to backup, but our maneuvering capability is degraded." Evelyn could feel the Apache's response becoming sluggish as backup systems struggled to compensate for battle damage. The helicopter that had felt like an extension of her own body now fought against her control inputs, requiring constant correction to maintain stable flight. Their tactical options were rapidly diminishing as mechanical problems compounded the numerical disadvantage they already faced. Through her damaged canopy, she could see the Mi-28 Night Hunter positioning itself for what appeared to be a final attack run. The sophisticated Russian helicopter climbed to maximum weapons range while its crew prepared to deliver a killing blow against the crippled Apache. Time was running out, and the promised air support was still minutes away. "Rodriguez, I need one perfect shot. Can you get me a firing solution on that Night Hunter? He's at maximum range and maneuvering defensively." "I can try, but the probability of hit is less than 30% with our damaged systems." "Then we'd better make it count. Designate target and prepare to fire on my command." What happened next would be analyzed by military aviation experts for years to come. Instead of attempting a conventional attack, Evelyn used the Apache's damaged condition as a tactical advantage, allowing the aircraft to appear more disabled than it actually was while maneuvering into an optimal firing position through seemingly erratic flight patterns. The enemy pilot, believing his opponent was nearly finished, made the crucial mistake of closing range to ensure his next missile strike would be fatal. As the Mi-28 approached within 800 meters, Rodriguez achieved the target lock they needed. Target designated. Hellfire missile ready. Fire. The AGM-114 Hellfire missile streaked away from the Apache's remaining weapon pylon, its tandem warhead designed to penetrate the heaviest armor. The enemy pilot detected the launch and attempted evasive action, but at this range, the missile's guidance system had more than enough time to track and intercept its target. The explosion lit up the afternoon sky as the Mi-28 disintegrated in a ball of flame and debris. 2 down, 2 remaining. The odds were finally approaching something resembling manageable. "Outstanding shot," Rodriguez shouted over the roar of their damaged engines. That's 2 confirmed kills. But their celebration was premature. The remaining enemy helicopters won Hind and the converted Mi-8 had used the distraction of the aerial duel to position themselves for a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Evelyn realized with growing alarm that they had been maneuvered into exactly the kind of tactical trap she had been trying to avoid. "Ma'am, we've got serious problems," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Both remaining hostiles are positioning for simultaneous attacks from our 6 and 9 o'clock. Our damaged flight controls won't let us evade effectively. In both directions." The tactical situation had reached its crisis point. Their Apache was damaged, low on ammunition, and facing 2 enemy aircraft that had learned from their teammates' mistakes. Evelyn's fuel gauge showed they had perhaps 10 minutes of flight time remaining under combat conditions, and the promised C-130 gunship was still several minutes away. Through her radio, she could hear the distant rumble of the approaching T-130s. Engines, but distance and time were working against them. The enemy pilots had apparently detected the incoming support aircraft and were pressing their attack with the desperation of professionals who knew their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. "This is it," she told Rodriguez. "Whatever happens in the next 2 minutes determines whether we go home or become another memorial wall." The revelation came not through tactical genius or technological superiority, but through a fundamental understanding of human nature under extreme stress. Evelyn realized that their enemies, despite their professional competence, were operating under the same pressures and limitations that affected all combat aviators. They had fuel constraints, ammunition limitations, and crew fatigue that could be exploited by a pilot willing to take calculated risks. "Rodriguez, I'm going to do something that violates every rule in the tactical manual. When I give the command, I want you to shut down our radar warning receiver and electronic countermeasures. Make us invisible to their targeting systems for exactly 30 seconds. Ma'am, that will leave us completely vulnerable to missile attack. That's the point. They're going to think we've suffered catastrophic systems failure and are helpless. When they close in for the kill, we're going to surprise them with everything we have left." It was a gamble that required split-second timing and absolute trust between pilot and weapons officer. If the enemy pilot suspected the ruse, or if their attack came faster than anticipated, Phoenix 7 would be destroyed without the defensive systems that might have saved them. But if the deception worked, they might gain the tactical advantage needed to survive until help arrived. "Electronic warfare systems offline," Rodriguez reported grimly. "We're running naked." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Both enemy helicopters altered their attack vectors, converging on what they believed was a disabled Apache that could no longer defend itself. The Hind and the Mi-8 approached with the confidence of predators closing in on wounded prey, their crews probably already planning their victory reports. 200 meters. Range point blank in aerial combat terms, Evelyn gave the command, "Light them up." The Apache's remaining systems came online simultaneously as Rodriguez engaged both targets with the last of their ammunition. The chain gun traversed rapidly between the 2 aircraft while the final Hellfire missile launched toward the larger Mi-8 transport. At this range, even damaged fire control systems couldn't miss. The Hind took a burst of 30mm cannon rounds through its cockpit, killing both crew members instantly and sending the helicopter spinning toward the ground in an uncontrolled descent. The Mi-8 tried to evade the incoming missile, but succeeded only in presenting a better target angle for the warhead's proximity fuse. Both enemy aircraft hit the valley floor within seconds of each other, their fuel and ammunition stores detonating in spectacular explosions that echoed off the surrounding mountains. 4 enemy helicopters, probably worth more than $50 million and representing years of ** training for their crews, had been eliminated by a single Apache flown by a pilot who refused to accept defeat. "Phoenix 7, this is Ghostwriter 3-4, came the voice of the AC-130 pilot as the massive gunship finally arrived over the battlefield. "We show multiple ground explosions in your vicinity. What's your status?" Evelyn keyed her radio with shaking hands, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Ghostwriter 3-4, Phoenix 7. 4. Enemy helicopters destroyed, crew uninjured, aircraft damaged but flyable. We could have used you 5 minutes ago, but we managed to keep things interesting until you arrived." "Copy that, Phoenix 7. Hell of a job. We'll escort you back to base." As they limped toward home with the AC-130 providing protective overwatch, Rodriguez began conducting post-flight damage assessment while Evelyn fought to keep their battered Apache in the air. Hydraulic fluid leaked from severed lines, warning lights flashed across the instrument panel, and engine parameters showed the stress of combat maneuvering and battle damage. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, "in 8 years of combat flying, I've never seen anything like what you just did. That was either the most brilliant tactical move I've ever witnessed, or the most insane." "Probably both," Evelyn admitted, her hands still trembling slightly from the aftereffects of combat stress. "But we're alive and they're not. Sometimes. That's the only measure that matters." The recognition of what they had accomplished would come later, through intelligence analysis, after-action reports, and recommendations for commendations. But in the immediate aftermath of the engagement, all that mattered was the simple fact of survival against overwhelming odds. 4 enemy helicopters had attempted to destroy a single Apache, and they had failed despite every tactical advantage. As forward operating base, Chapman appeared on the horizon. Evelyn began the mental process of transitioning from combat mode to the administrative requirements that would follow such an unprecedented engagement. There would be debriefings, maintenance assessments, intelligence reports, and probably media attention that she neither wanted nor needed. But for now, she was content to fly her damaged Apache home while the sun set behind the Hindu Kush Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded her, despite everything, that beauty could still exist in a world torn apart by violence and conflict. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman had never hosted a session quite like this one. Senior officers from multiple commands had flown in specifically to hear Captain Evelyn Thomas and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez recount their engagement with 4 enemy helicopters, an air-to-air combat scenario that military analysts had considered unlikely to impossible in the Afghan theater of operations. Colonel Marcus Webb, their squadron commander, sat at the head of a conference table laden with recording equipment, laptops, and classified intelligence folders. Beside him were representatives from Special Operations Command, military intelligence, and a civilian contractor whose presence suggested that this incident had implications reaching far beyond routine combat operations. "Captain Thomas, Colonel," Webb began, "before we proceed with the tactical analysis, I want you to understand that preliminary intelligence suggests you and Sergeant Rodriguez engaged and destroyed what appears to have been a Russian Special Operations aviation unit conducting unauthorized reconnaissance in Afghan airspace." The words hung in the air like unexploded ordnance. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten as the full implications of their aerial battle became clear. They hadn't simply survived a Taliban ambush, they had potentially triggered an international incident with one of America's primary geopolitical rivals. "Sir, we engaged aircraft that fired on us first," she replied carefully. "Our rules of engagement were clear, and we acted in self-defense." "Absolutely correct, Captain. Your actions were entirely appropriate and probably prevented a significant intelligence breach. But the diplomatic ramifications are complex." The intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed major whose name tag read Harrison, opened one of the classified folders and spread several photographs across the table. The images showed wreckage from the 4 destroyed helicopters, with close-ups highlighting specific equipment and markings that had survived the crashes. The aircraft you engaged were not Taliban-operated stolen helicopters, Major Harrison explained. These were frontline Russian military aircraft with the latest electronic warfare suites, advanced weapon systems, and crews that had clearly received extensive training in Western tactical procedures. This was a professional military operation, disguised as insurgent activity. Rodriguez leaned forward to examine the photographs more closely. "Ma'am, that explains why their coordination was so sophisticated. These weren't irregulars with captured equipment. These were Spetsnaz aviation units or something equivalent. The revelation transformed their desperate aerial battle from a routine combat engagement into something approaching an act of war. Russian special forces had been operating deep within Afghan territory, potentially gathering intelligence on American military capabilities or preparing for operations that could have threatened U.S. forces throughout the region." "What was their mission?" Evelyn asked, her analytical mind immediately focusing on the strategic implications. 4 helicopters don't conduct reconnaissance. That's an assault force or extraction team. That's what we're trying to determine, Major Harrison replied. Initial analysis suggests they may have been positioning to extract high-value targets from the region, possibly Taliban leaders who had been cooperating with Russian intelligence services. Your engagement prevented whatever operation they were planning to execute. The weight of responsibility settled on Evelyn's shoulders like lead armor. She had made split-second tactical decisions based on immediate threats to her aircraft and crew, but those decisions had apparently disrupted international conspiracies and covert operations that reached to the highest levels of global politics. "Captain," Colonel Webb continued, "I want you to know that your actions have been recognized at the highest levels of command. The President has been briefed on this engagement, and there will likely be significant recognition for both you and Sergeant Rodriguez." Recognition was the last thing on Evelyn's mind as she contemplated the broader implications of their aerial battle. 4 Russian Special Operations aviators were dead, their expensive aircraft destroyed, and their mission, whatever it had been, terminated with extreme prejudice. Such events had consequences that rippled through diplomatic channels and military command structures in ways that a tactical pilot could barely comprehend. "Sir, what about operational security?" she asked. "If word of this engagement becomes public... Classification has already been handled," Major Harrison assured her. "Official reports will describe this as an engagement with Taliban forces using captured aircraft. The true nature of the opposition will remain classified at the highest levels." Over the following weeks, the aftermath of their aerial engagement continued to unfold in ways that neither Evelyn nor Rodriguez could have anticipated. Intelligence analysts studying the wreckage discovered equipment and communications gear that provided insights into Russian special operations capabilities that had been unknown to Western intelligence services. The tactical lessons learned from the engagement were incorporated into training programs at aviation schools throughout the military. More personally, Evelyn found herself dealing with the psychological aftermath of killing trained military professionals who, under different circumstances, might have been allies rather than enemies. The Taliban fighters she had engaged in previous missions were clearly hostile combatants threatening American forces, but these Russian aviators had been following orders from their government in pursuit of objectives that remained unclear. Nightmares that had occasionally troubled her sleep became more frequent and intense. She would wake in the middle of the night, her flight suit soaked with perspiration, reliving those desperate minutes when survival had depended on split-second decisions and perfect execution under impossible pressure. The faces of the enemy. Pilots remained unknown to her, but she found herself wondering about their families, their children, their reasons for accepting such dangerous assignments. Rodriguez proved to be an invaluable source of support during these difficult weeks. His own experience with the moral complexities of combat operations provided perspective that helped Evelyn process the emotional toll of their engagement. They spent long hours discussing the ethical implications of their actions, the nature of military service in an era of global conflict, and the psychological strategies necessary to maintain sanity in an insane profession. "We did what we had to do," he told her during one of their conversations. "4 enemy aircraft tried to kill us, and we killed them first. The politics and diplomacy are above our pay grade. Our job is to bring each other home alive, and we did that." His simple summary became a mantra that helped Evelyn maintain perspective when the broader implications threatened to overwhelm her sense of purpose. She was a tactical pilot, not a diplomat or strategist. Her responsibility was to her crew, her mission, and her fellow soldiers, not to the complex geopolitical calculations that shaped international relations. The Apache helicopter that had carried them through their aerial battle was eventually repaired and returned to service, but not before every component had been thoroughly analyzed to understand how battle damage had affected its performance. The lessons learned from their damaged flight control systems, degraded communications equipment, and depleted ammunition stores contributed to modifications that would benefit future aircrew facing similar challenges. Evelyn's reputation within the aviation community underwent a fundamental transformation. She had always been respected as a competent pilot with good tactical instincts, but surviving a 4-against-1 aerial engagement elevated her to legendary status among her peers. Young aviators sought her advice, experienced pilots studied her tactics, and senior officers consulted her opinions on aircraft capabilities and training requirements. The attention was both gratifying and burdensome. She had never sought fame or recognition, preferring to focus on the practical aspects of flying and fighting rather than the celebrity that sometimes accompanied exceptional military service. But her insights into aerial combat proved valuable for developing new tactics and training programs that could save lives in future engagements. 6 months after the engagement, she received orders transferring her to the Army Aviation Warfighting Center at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where she would serve as an instructor pilot specializing in advanced aerial combat techniques. The assignment represented a significant career advancement and recognition of her expertise, but it also meant leaving active combat operations for the more academic environment of a training facility. Rodriguez received similar orders, assigning him to work with Evelyn in developing new curricula for weapons systems officers facing the increasingly complex threat environment of modern warfare. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of aerial combat, would continue in the classroom where they could share their hard-won knowledge with the next generation of Apache crews. The transition from combat operations to training duties required significant psychological adjustment. The adrenaline rush of flight operations in hostile territory was replaced by the methodical pace of academic instruction, where life and death decisions were replaced by gradual skill development and theoretical discussions. But both Evelyn and Rodriguez found satisfaction in knowing that their experience could help other aviators survive similar challenges. Their first class of student pilots included several women who had specifically requested training from Captain Thomas, hoping to learn from the first female pilot to survive multiple aircraft aerial combat in a single engagement. Evelyn took special pride in mentoring these young women, understanding the unique challenges they would face as minorities in a traditionally male-dominated field. "Flying is about physics, not politics," she told her female students during their initial orientation. "The helicopter doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your personal beliefs. It only responds to competent piloting and sound tactical decisions. Master those fundamentals, and you'll succeed regardless of what obstacles others try to place in your path." The lessons she taught extended far beyond aircraft handling and weapons employment. She emphasized the importance of crew coordination, stress management under combat conditions, and the moral framework necessary to make life and death decisions while maintaining psychological health. Her students learned not just how to fly and fight, but how to carry the emotional weight of military service without being crushed by it. The classified nature of her most significant combat engagement meant that many of the tactical lessons she had learned could not be shared openly. But she found ways to incorporate those insights into training scenarios that prepared her students for the kind of sophisticated threats they might face in future conflicts. The emphasis on electronic warfare, coordinated multi-platform attacks, and the importance of maintaining situational awareness under jamming conditions became central themes in her instruction. Rodriguez proved equally effective as an instructor, bringing his technical expertise and combat experience to bear on the complex challenge of training weapons systems officers. His ability to maintain calm professionalism under extreme stress became a model for students, learning to operate the Apache's sophisticated weapons suites under combat conditions. Together, they developed training programs that pushed student crews to their limits while maintaining safety standards that prevented accidents. Their simulated combat scenarios became legendary among aviation students for their realism and intensity, creating learning experiences that closely approximated the stress and complexity of actual aerial warfare. As Evelyn's first year as an instructor progressed, she began to understand that her true legacy might not be the enemy she had destroyed or the tactical victories she had achieved, but the knowledge and skills she could pass on to others. Every student who graduated from her programs would carry her insights into future conflicts, potentially saving lives and achieving missions that might otherwise have failed. The nightmares gradually became less frequent as she found new purpose in training and mentoring. The faces of the Russian pilots she had killed would never completely fade from her memory, but they were balanced by the faces of the young aviators she was preparing for service. Her experience in combat gave weight to her instruction that theoretical knowledge alone could never provide. The St. Christopher medallion still hung around her neck, connecting her to her family's aviation heritage while serving as a reminder of the responsibilities that came with the privilege of flight. Her father visited Fort Rucker during her second month as an instructor, observing her classes and offering the quiet approval that meant more to her than any military decoration. "You've found your calling," he told her after watching her conduct a particularly complex training scenario. "Teaching is just another form of service, and you're serving your country by preparing the next generation for challenges we can't even imagine yet." The wisdom in his words became apparent as international tensions continued to escalate and new threats emerged that would require all the skill and dedication that American military aviators could provide. The lessons learned in the skies over Afghanistan would prove relevant in conflicts yet to come, passed from instructor to student in an unbroken chain of knowledge and experience. 5 years after that desperate afternoon above the Hindu Kush Mountains, Captain Evelyn Thomas, now Major Thomas, stood before a mixed audience of military officers, defense contractors, and international allies at the Army Aviation Association's annual symposium in Nashville, Tennessee. Her presentation on multi-platform aerial engagement tactics had become one of the most requested briefings in military aviation circles, though the classified details of her actual combat experience remained carefully obscured behind theoretical scenarios and hypothetical examples. The woman who took the podium bore subtle but unmistakable marks of her journey from combat pilot to instructor to strategic thinker. Her auburn hair was now cut in a more conservative style appropriate to her senior rank, and fine lines around her eyes spoke of countless hours spent in cockpits and classrooms. But her voice carried the same calm authority that had guided her through aerial combat, and her analytical mind had only grown sharper with experience and education. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her presentation slides displaying complex tactical diagrams, "the future of aerial warfare will be defined not by superior technology alone, but by our ability to adapt to threats that evolve faster than our acquisition cycles can respond. The lessons we've learned in current conflicts must inform our preparation for challenges we haven't yet imagined. In the audience, Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, recently promoted and now serving as the Senior Enlisted Advisor for Apache training programs, watched with quiet pride as his former pilot shared insights that had been purchased with blood and terror over the mountains of Afghanistan. Their partnership had evolved into a professional relationship that transcended traditional rank structures, built on shared experience that few others could understand. Among the attendees was Dr. Sarah Chun, a defense analyst from the Rand Corporation, who had spent months studying the engagement that had made Evelyn famous within classified circles. Chun's research into the tactical and strategic implications of near-peer aerial combat had contributed to new doctoral publications and training requirements that were reshaping how the Army prepared its aviation units for future conflicts. Proliferation of advanced helicopter technology to potential adversaries, Evelyn continued, means that American aviators can no longer assume technological superiority will guarantee tactical advantage. We must emphasize superior training, innovative tactics, and the kind of crew coordination that can overcome numerical disadvantages. Her words carried weight not just because of her rank or position, but because everyone in the room knew she had faced exactly the scenario she was describing. The official records might classify her opponents as insurgents with captured equipment, but the aviation community understood that she had survived something far more dangerous and significant. After the presentation, a young captain approached the podium with the nervous determination of someone seeking guidance from a legend. First Lieutenant Jessica Martinez had recently completed flight school and was preparing for her first deployment to an increasingly dangerous Middle East, where helicopter losses were mounting and enemy capabilities were evolving rapidly. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Martinez said, "I've studied your tactical papers and training materials. Do you have any advice for someone about to face combat for the first time?" Evelyn looked at the young woman and saw herself 6 years earlier, eager, well-trained, but unprepared for the psychological realities of warfare that no amount of classroom instruction could fully convey. She also saw something else: the future of military aviation represented by a generation that took female combat pilots for granted rather than seeing them as anomalies to be questioned or doubted. "Trust your training, but don't become a slave to doctrine," Evelyn replied. "The enemy gets a vote in every engagement, and they'll always try to do something you haven't prepared for. When that happens, fall back on fundamental flying skills and basic tactical principles. And remember that your most important mission is to bring your crew home alive." The conversation continued for several minutes, covering topics from technical systems management to stress coping strategies. Evelyn found herself repeating advice that Rodriguez had given her years earlier, perpetuating a chain of knowledge that connected generations of warriors facing similar challenges in different contexts. Later that evening, at the symposium's formal dinner, she found herself seated between General Patricia Morrison, the first female aviator to command a combat aviation brigade, and Colonel David Keem, whose research into unmanned systems was reshaping the future of aerial warfare. The conversation ranged across technical developments, strategic challenges, and the evolving nature of international conflict. "Your engagement 5 years ago changed more than you might realize," General Morrison observed. "It demonstrated capabilities and vulnerabilities that influenced procurement decisions worth billions of dollars. The new Apache variants being developed incorporate lessons learned from your battle damage analysis." Colonel Kim nodded in agreement. "The electronic warfare modifications we're implementing are direct responses to the jamming techniques your opponents used. In a very real sense, that 30-minute engagement continues to shape American military aviation." The observation struck Evelyn with unexpected force. She had always viewed her aerial combat as a desperate struggle for survival. But these senior officers were describing it as a historical event with continuing strategic implications. The Russians who had tried to kill her had inadvertently provided intelligence about their capabilities and intentions that continued to influence American military planning. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if those 4 aircraft had simply chosen to disengage rather than press their attack, she mused. They might have completed their mission and extracted whatever intelligence they were seeking. But they didn't, General Morrison replied. They underestimated an American pilot and paid the price for their arrogance. That's a lesson that reverberates through their command structure, just as much as it influences ours. The formal dinner was followed by a reception where Evelyn found herself surrounded by young officers seeking advice, senior leaders discussing policy implications, and defense contractors interested in her perspective on future requirements. The attention was simultaneously gratifying and overwhelming. She remained more comfortable in a cockpit than at a cocktail party. Rodriguez appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine and a knowing smile. "Still not used to being famous, are you?" "I didn't sign up to be famous," she replied. "I signed up to fly helicopters and serve my country." "You're doing both," he pointed out. "Just in ways you didn't expect when you were a second lieutenant. Fresh out of flight school." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, distinguished man in civilian clothes whose bearing suggested military background despite his business suit. He introduced himself as James Patterson, a former Apache pilot who had transitioned to civilian contracting work after retirement from the Army. "Major Thomas," Patterson said, "I wanted to thank you personally. My son is currently in flight school, and he's studying your tactical innovations. Knowing that pilots like you are developing the curriculum gives me confidence that he'll receive training that could save his life." The personal connection transformed Evelyn's understanding of her role as an instructor. She wasn't just teaching tactics and procedures, she was preparing someone's son or daughter to survive challenges that might be even more dangerous than what she had faced. The responsibility was both humbling and motivating. "Mr. Patterson," she replied, "your son will receive the best training we can provide. But more importantly, he'll learn that survival in combat depends on teamwork, preparation, and the willingness to adapt when circumstances demand it." As the evening wound down, Evelyn found herself on the hotel's outdoor terrace, looking up at stars that were barely visible through the urban light pollution of Nashville. The clear mountain air of Afghanistan seemed like something from another lifetime, though the memories remained vivid enough to touch. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother back in North Dakota. "Saw the symposium mentioned in the Army Times. Proud of you, honey." The simple message from home grounded her in ways that no amount of professional recognition could accomplish. Despite her military achievements and growing reputation, she remained Sarah and James Thomas's daughter, connected to wheat fields and endless skies that had first inspired her. Dreams of flight. 10 years after the aerial engagement that had defined her career, Major Evelyn Thomas was selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel, an assignment as the commander of an Apache battalion preparing for deployment to Eastern Europe, where tensions with Russia had escalated to levels not seen since the Cold War. The irony was not lost on her. She would be leading American helicopters in a theater where they might face the same kinds of sophisticated threats she had encountered over Afghanistan. Her change of command ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with her parents Rodriguez and dozens of former students in attendance. As she accepted the battalion colors from the outgoing commander, she thought about the circular nature of military service, how lessons learned in one conflict inevitably informed preparation for the next. Her first address to the battalion emphasized themes that had become central to her philosophy of military leadership: the importance of technical excellence balanced with tactical flexibility, the value of crew coordination under stress, and the understanding that every mission carried potential consequences reaching far beyond immediate objectives. "This battalion has a proud history of service in multiple conflicts," she told the assembled soldiers. "Our mission is to maintain that legacy while preparing for challenges that may test us in ways our predecessors never faced. We will train to the highest standards because our enemies certainly are, and we will never forget that our ultimate objective is to bring everyone home." 15 years after her aerial combat, Colonel Evelyn Thomas retired from active duty and accepted a position as the director of the new Center for Advanced Aerial Warfare Studies at the Air Force Academy. Her mission was to develop interdisciplinary programs that combine traditional military science with emerging technologies, preparing future officers for a rapidly evolving strategic environment. Her first major initiative was the establishment of exchange programs with allied nations, sharing tactical innovations while learning from international partners who brought different perspectives to common challenges. The classified lessons from her own combat experience continued to influence curriculum development, though always disguised within broader theoretical frameworks. Rodriguez, now approaching his own retirement, joined her civilian team as the senior instructor for weapons systems integration. Their partnership, which had begun in the cockpit of a combat helicopter, continued in classrooms where they prepared new generations of warriors for challenges they could barely imagine. "You know," Rodriguez observed during one of their planning sessions, "if someone had told me 20 years ago that we'd end up as professors, I'd have recommended them for a psychiatric evaluation." "Stranger things have happened," Evelyn replied. "Besides, this is still military service, just with better coffee and fewer people trying to kill us." Their work at the academy attracted international attention as military leaders sought to understand how small unit tactics could influence strategic outcomes in an interconnected world. Evelyn's analysis of her own aerial engagement became a case study in adaptation under pressure, demonstrating how individual initiative could achieve results that traditional doctrine said were impossible. 20 years after her combat deployment, Dr. Evelyn Thomas, she had completed a doctorate in strategic studies during her academic appointment, published a memoir titled Phoenix Rising: Lessons from the Sky. The book carefully avoided classified details while offering insights into the psychological and tactical aspects of modern warfare that resonated with both military and civilian audiences. The memoir's success led to speaking engagements around the world where she shared her perspectives on leadership, innovation, and the human cost of technological conflict. Her message remained consistent, that individual excellence and team coordination could overcome seemingly impossible challenges, but that victory always came with responsibility for the consequences. At age 55, she established the Thomas Foundation for Military Aviation Safety, using proceeds from her book and speaking fees to fund research into crew survivability and training improvements. The Foundation's work contributed to design modifications and procedural changes that prevented accidents and saved lives, extending her influence far beyond her own flying career. Her father's St. Christopher medallion, now tarnished with age, but still worn during important occasions, had become a family heirloom that would eventually pass to her niece, another young woman who dreamed of commanding aircraft in service to her country. The chain of inspiration and dedication that had connected 3 generations of military aviators continued into a 4th, carrying forward lessons learned in peace and war across decades of technological change. On the 25th anniversary of her aerial engagement, the Army Aviation Museum dedicated a new exhibit to innovations in combat aviation, featuring her Apache helicopter, now restored and preserved for future generations to study. The display included interactive simulations that allowed visitors to experience simplified versions of the tactical challenges she had faced, though the full complexity and terror of aerial combat could never be adequately reproduced in a museum setting. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, now retired and living in Texas, traveled to the museum dedication with his grown children, sharing stories of their grandmother's service and explaining how individual courage could influence the course of history. The circular nature of mentorship and inspiration continued as new generations learned from those who had gone before. At the dedication ceremony, an aging Colonel Evelyn Thomas, now in her 60s, but still carrying herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, spoke to an audience that included current Apache pilots, military historians, and young people considering military service. "This helicopter," she said, gesturing toward the restored aircraft, "represents more than advanced technology or tactical capability. It represents the culmination of training, teamwork, and determination that enabled two people to overcome impossible odds through preparation and mutual trust. But more importantly, it represents the continuing evolution of military aviation and the young men and women who will face future challenges we can't yet imagine." Her words carried the weight of experience and the hope of someone who had dedicated her life to preparing others for service that might demand ultimate sacrifice. The legacy of those desperate minutes over Afghanistan continued to influence military aviation through the people she had trained, the innovations she had inspired, and the example she had set for facing impossible situations with professional competence and moral courage. As the ceremony concluded and visitors began exploring the exhibit, she found herself standing alone beside the Apache helicopter that had carried her through the most defining moments of her career. The machine was silent now, its weapons removed and its engines cold, but it remained a monument to the partnership between human skill and technological capability that defined modern warfare. Her reflection was interrupted by a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, who approached with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Ma'am," the child asked, "were you really a helicopter pilot?" "Yes," Evelyn replied, kneeling to bring herself to the child's eye level. "I was. Was it scary?" "Sometimes," Evelyn answered honestly. "But I had excellent training and a great partner, and we took care of each other. Could I be a helicopter pilot someday? If you study hard, stay physically fit, and really want to serve your country, then yes, you could be a pilot. Maybe even better than I was." The child smiled with the unlimited optimism of youth and ran back to her parents, already dreaming of future adventures in the sky. Watching her go, Evelyn felt a profound sense of continuity, that the sacrifices and achievements of her generation had created opportunities for the next that might surpass anything they had imagined. 30 years after her aerial engagement, the strategic landscape had evolved in ways that validated many of her predictions about the future of warfare. Conflicts involving sophisticated opponents with advanced technology had become routine, and the tactical innovations she had pioneered were now standard doctrine taught to every helicopter crew. Dr. Evelyn Thomas, now 73 years old, and recognized as one of the leading authorities on tactical aviation, continued her work as an emeritus professor while mentoring a new generation of scholars studying the intersection of technology and human performance in combat. Her research had evolved to encompass not just aerial warfare, but the broader implications of how individual actions in tactical situations could influence strategic outcomes. The Thomas Institute for Combat Innovation, established at her alma mater with funding from grateful alumni and defense contractors, had become a leading center for research into adaptive leadership under extreme stress. Graduate students from around the world studied her engagement as a case study in decision-making when conventional options had been exhausted, learning principles that applied far beyond military aviation. Her protege, Dr. Maria Santos, a former Apache pilot who had served in the new generation of conflicts that followed Afghanistan, carried forward Evelyn's research into the psychological aspects of combat leadership. Santos had experienced her own defining moment during a humanitarian mission in Africa, where her ability to adapt under pressure had been directly influenced by principles she had learned from studying Evelyn's tactical innovations. The mentor student. Relationship in military aviation, Santos wrote in her doctoral dissertation, represents a direct transmission of combat knowledge that cannot be replicated through simulation or classroom instruction. The lessons learned by one generation in actual combat become the survival tools of the next, creating an unbroken chain of tactical evolution. The chain that had connected Evelyn to her father and her father to his father now extended forward. Through multiple generations of aviators who carried forward lessons learned in the crucible of aerial combat. Each generation faced new challenges and developed new solutions, but the fundamental principles of preparation, teamwork, and moral courage remained constant. Rodriguez, now in his 80s and still sharp despite his advanced age, occasionally joined Evelyn for speaking engagements where they shared their perspectives on partnership and trust in high-stress situations. Their friendship had endured through decades of professional evolution, family changes, and the gradual transition from active service to reflection on service. "People always ask me what it was like to fly with Captain Thomas," Rodriguez would tell audiences. "The answer is simple. I never worried about coming home, because I knew she would never leave me behind and never accept defeat as long as we were still breathing." That kind of trust changes how you approach impossible situations. Their partnership had become legendary within military aviation circles, studied not just for its tactical innovations, but as an example of how effective crew coordination could overcome technological and numerical disadvantages. The principles they had demonstrated during their aerial engagement were now taught at service academies around the world, influencing doctrine far beyond American military aviation. Evelyn's memoir had been translated into 17 languages and remained required reading at military academies in allied nations. The book's emphasis on adaptive thinking and moral leadership had influenced a generation of officers who now held senior positions in military and civilian organizations. Her impact on institutional culture extended far beyond the specific tactical lessons of her combat experience. At age 75, she was invited to deliver the keynote address at the centennial celebration of the Army Aviation Branch, speaking to an audience that included active-duty pilots, flying aircraft that would have seemed like science fiction during her own combat deployment. Technological advancement had accelerated exponentially, but the human factors that determine success or failure in aerial combat remained remarkably consistent. "The Apache helicopter I flew 35 years ago," she told the assembled aviators, "carried computers less powerful than the devices you keep in your pockets." But the principles that kept Rodriguez and me alive: thorough preparation, effective communication, and refusal to accept defeat, remain just as relevant today as they were then. Her words resonated with young pilots facing new forms of aerial combat involving autonomous systems, cyber warfare, and threats that operated across multiple domains simultaneously. The complexity of modern warfare had increased exponentially, but the fundamental requirement for human judgment under pressure remained unchanged. The medal she had been awarded for her aerial engagement, initially classified but later declassified, when the strategic situation had evolved, was now displayed in the Pentagon, alongside other decorations representing exceptional valor in combat. But she took greater pride in the photographs that covered the walls of her study. Hundreds of former students who had gone on to serve with distinction, many crediting her training with saving their lives in subsequent conflicts. Her influence on military aviation extended through a network of protégés who now held positions throughout the defense establishment. Generals who had learned tactical principles in her classrooms applied those lessons to strategic planning. Defense contractors who had served under her command developed new technologies guided by her insights into human-machine interface requirements. St. Christopher Medallion, that had connected her to previous generations of military aviators, now hung in a place of honor in her study, alongside photographs spanning 8 decades of American military aviation. The circular nature of inspiration and mentorship continued as young people discovered her story and decided to pursue military service based on the example she had set. On quiet evenings in her retirement home near Colorado Springs, she would sometimes stand on her balcony and watch military aircraft conducting training flights in the distance. The sight of helicopters against the mountain backdrop never failed to evoke memories of that desperate afternoon over Afghanistan when survival had depended on split-second decisions and perfect execution under impossible pressure. The nightmares that had once troubled her sleep had long since faded, replaced by dreams of teaching and mentoring that reflected her transformation from warrior to educator. But the lessons of aerial combat remained vivid and immediate, ready to be shared with anyone seeking to understand how individuals could overcome seemingly impossible challenges through preparation and determination. Her legacy lived on not just in the tactical innovation she had developed or the students she had trained, but in the broader principle that individual excellence and moral courage could influence outcomes far beyond their immediate circumstances. The aerial engagement that had defined her career had become a symbol of how ordinary people could achieve extraordinary results when facing extraordinary challenges. As she approached her 80th birthday, Dr. Evelyn Thomas began work on her final project, a comprehensive analysis of how combat lessons learned in previous conflicts could be applied to the emerging challenges of warfare in space and cyberspace. Even in retirement, she remained focused on preparing future generations for challenges that had not yet been imagined. The woman who had once fought for her life above the mountains of Afghanistan continued to serve her country by thinking about problems that might not manifest for decades to come. Her mind, still sharp despite her advanced age, worked to bridge the gap between historical experience and future requirements, ensuring that lessons purchased with blood would not be forgotten as technology evolved. The helicopter that had carried her through her defining moment now resided in the Smithsonian Institution, restored to pristine condition and displayed alongside other aircraft that had shaped the course of military history. Visitors from around the world studied the Apache that had survived a 4-against-1 aerial engagement, learning about the intersection of technology and human performance that defined modern warfare. The plague beside the aircraft told the story in simple terms. This H-64 Apache helicopter was flown by Captain Evelyn Thomas and Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez during a combat engagement in Afghanistan in which they defeated 4 enemy aircraft despite being outnumbered and sustaining significant battle damage. Their victory demonstrated the effectiveness of superior training and crew coordination in overcoming technological and numerical disadvantages. But the simple words could never convey the full complexity of that afternoon when 2 people had refused to accept defeat despite facing impossible odds. The terror, determination, tactical innovation, and moral courage that had characterized their aerial battle could only be understood by those who had faced similar challenges and discovered reserves of strength they had not known they possessed. Children, visiting the museum with their parents, often asked about the helicopter and the people who had flown it. Their questions about fear, courage, and service carried forward the story to new generations who might someday face their own defining moments in circumstances that could not yet be imagined. At age 85, Evelyn Thomas passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family members who had heard her stories countless times, but never tired of learning from her example. Her funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by hundreds of former students, fellow veterans, and senior military leaders whose careers had been influenced by her teaching and example. The eulogy, delivered by General Maria Santos, who had risen to become the first Hispanic woman to serve as Chief of Staff of the Army, summarized a life dedicated to service and education. Dr. Thomas taught us that excellence in military service requires not just technical competence, but moral courage and the willingness to continue fighting when continuation seems impossible. Her legacy lives on in every pilot who refuses to accept defeat, every crew member who trusts their partner completely, and every leader who puts the welfare of their people above their own comfort. The St. Christopher Medallion was buried with her, ending a century-long journey through 3 major conflicts and decades of peacetime service. But the principles it had symbolized, duty, honor, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others, continued to influence military aviation through the countless people whose lives she had touched. Rodriguez, now 92 and one of the last survivors of their generation, spoke at the graveside service with the quiet dignity of someone who had witnessed history and understood its true meaning. Captain Thomas never forgot that our most important mission was to bring each other home. Today, she's completed her final mission, and it's time for the rest of us to continue the work she started. The words carried across the cemetery, where thousands of white headstones mark the graves of those who had served with equal dedication in different times and different conflicts. The continuity of service and sacrifice stretched across generations, connecting those who had fallen in battle with those who had dedicated their lives to preparing others for service. Years after her death, the story of Captain Evelyn Thomas and Staff Sergeant Rodriguez continued to inspire new generations of military aviators facing challenges that the original participants could never have imagined. Their aerial engagement had become more than historical fact, it had become legend, demonstrating that individual courage and competence could overcome seemingly impossible odds when guided by proper training and moral purpose. The final lesson of their story was perhaps the most important: that heroism was not about seeking glory or recognition, but about doing what was necessary to protect others and complete the mission, regardless of personal cost. Their legacy lived on in every military aviator who chose service over safety, in every crew member who trusted their partner with their life, and in every leader who put the welfare of their people above their own ambitions. As they limped toward home with the AC-130 providing protective overwatch, Rodriguez began conducting post-flight damage assessment, while Evelyn fought to keep their battered Apache in the air. Hydraulic fluid leaked from severed lines, warning lights flashed across the instrument panel, and engine parameters showed the stress of combat maneuvering and battle damage. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, "in 8 years of combat flying, I've never seen anything like what you just did. That was either the most brilliant tactical move I've ever witnessed, or the most insane." "Probably both," Evelyn admitted, her hand still trembling slightly from the aftereffects of combat stress. "But we're alive, and they're not. Sometimes that's the only measure that matters." As Forward Operating Base Chapman appeared on the horizon, Evelyn began the mental process of transitioning from combat mode back to the routine of military life. There would be debriefings, maintenance reports, and probably commendations she neither wanted nor needed. But for now, she was content to fly her damaged Apache home while the sun set behind the Hindu Kush Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. 4 enemy helicopters had tried to destroy them, and they had failed. Phoenix 7 was coming home. These stories require extensive time and effort to research and produce. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more incredible true stories.